Have you ever sit in a training, a lecture or a workshop of someone known as an absolute capacity in your field, an expert? You have been really looking forward to it. You absorb every word, you sit there, you are amazed. Yet, despite your own interest and despite the other person's best efforts, it doesn't quite work out. Often how it feels is we feel blinded by their light, a bit like I at the moment. It's too much, too complex, too heavy. You leave the workshop still being impressed, maybe even in awe with the expert, yet with not much more to take away. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could package up some of this light that's blinding you at the moment and create maybe a metaphorical flashlight which you could take away to wherever you need it and where you are helped to see new things in front of you, things differently or things sharper? Well, we can. However, for this to happen, two things must come together that rarely coincide in any one person, which is being an expert and being good at teaching. Even for teachers who are trained to be both, we know that subject matter expertise and explanation skills correlate only up to a certain level. Beyond that, more content expertise actually hampers your ability to explain that very content. I'm an instructional designer. That means I work with experts who are requested or want to teach others, and I supplement their context expertise with expertise on how to teach. I'm very honored to be here today, and I would like to talk to you because I think it's a fascinating thing. Also, I think it's important that all of us acknowledge that when we ask experts to teach, that even if it's in their field of expertise, we ask them quite a lot, and I will explain you why. And I think it's a shame that all of this happens behind closed doors, because all of you, all of us are experts in some field. Could be bringing up children, could be web design, could be you're an expert in marveling at Australian gum trees, or at cooking. So I think all of us know the problem of explaining to other people why we are passionate or what we think, how we do things. So maybe in a few minutes you will have a flashlight to take away, and it helps you to engage with whoever your audience is more profoundly and more effectively. So when I thought about, okay, how do we go about this, guys? I thought of Bob. Of all the projects I did, the one with Bob was the one where the magic of my work is the most present. Bob is a very experienced project manager in a firm that builds steelmaking plants. So basically he's responsible for converting what's often literally not more than a green field into a system of machines where thousands of people produce hundreds of tons of steel every day. That's quite a job to lead a project team. And of all the things Bob does so marvelous well, one thing stood out, which is his ability to foresee risks. As you might imagine, there is quite a lot of risk involved in running such a project. Could be financial risk, could be security risk, employment risks, whatever, timeline. So, of course, his company had a vested interest to transfer his knowledge, whatever that means, to more junior project managers. That's why I was brought in, and we designed a training series for him to develop. Before we get into the details, let me make sure you have the right impression of Bob. Bob, in his early 50s, great sense of humor, debatable preference for plaid shirts, but what most important, he knew that these trainings were not about him. So he wouldn't hide behind jargon. He had no need to impress people. He knew it's about the people in front of him, and he knew it takes effort to go there. It's an absolute delight with people like him. When I first met him, his primary concern was his stage performance, his presence in front of other people. And very often, that's what comes to mind when you think about training. It's, how do I get across? I have a different view, though. I think what's most important is to have a game plan. not so much a game plan of what exactly you're going to say or what gestures you use, but a game plan of what ought to happen in the minds of the people in front of you. What insights do you want to create? What aha moments are important to you, for the people in front of you to have? And the game plan of how do you make this happen? So what exercises do you put to people? How do you carve stories that allow these insights you want to create to emerge in the minds of the people in front of you? Without such a game plan, ironically, every stage performance is rendered irrelevant. So what's my game plan now? My game plan is I would like to talk about 3 aspects of my work with Bob that go a bit beyond the obvious. They are rather subtle, but quite powerful. I hope to create some aha moments, maybe catch 1 or 2 smiles along the way. And after each of the points, I will wrap a takeaway up for you to take away. The first thing is about expectations. So when Bob and I started our project to design these trainings, everybody felt, okay, we would boil down Bob's expertise into a few bullet points to be put on a slide and distributed within the firm. And it's quite tempting, isn't it? The 10 rules of successful whatever. If you put these bullet points to other people, nothing changes. We found this out when Bob talked about negotiation tactics, and it was very important for him to get one message across, which was, in negotiation with, say, vendors, don't blink. So he talked about it at length. And the audience nodding in agreement, but not really grasping what he meant. So instead, what we did is, we turned it into an exercise where Bob would play against the audience and would actually exploit every blink they make. Whoa. Can you imagine the people after this exercise saying, now I really know what he meant when he said don't blink? So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is, it's not enough to distribute the insights of an expert. You actually have to engineer, you have to design a process to allow learners to understand what is meant. The second thing I want to talk about is about how do you get through to people? How do you have real impact? Very often when we think of getting through to people, we think of attention. We think that actually we compete with the outside world, mostly represented with mobiles and emails. I work in a corporate environment, so that's my focus. So what's the belief behind that? The belief is we would get through to people if only they'd listen. The problem is, people can listen very attentively, you still don't get through to them. So what is it you need to give them to get through to them? The answer is fairly simple, what they need and what they want. So when it's about managing risk, what do people want? Okay, what can happen, when can it happen, what options do I have, how do I decide, what do I do about it? Straightforward. So why is that so difficult? The thing is, for Bob, all these points are so obvious that he has transcended to think about them. He now organizes his knowledge in a different way. I ask him, for instance, could you map out for me the different kind of accruals? That's a financial transaction you do to account for risk on a project. Anyway, he did so. And what he came up with was something as elegant as I've never seen before. It was all the types of accruals you can make, but not mapped along any dimension of risk, but along their potential impact on tax. Whoa. So that was where his expertise was. Like, he saw all through these things, so he wouldn't focus on the risk, but actually focus beyond the risk. So what happens if you put this in front of people? They probably can all recite the types of accruals. They could tell you by heart the impact of tax, yet they wouldn't know what to do. So that's something we all know. It's called knowing-doing gap, which means you create a layer of theory which is entirely independent of practice. What does this mean? 2 things. One is, it's not to say that Bob couldn't do it. It's to say that he needs to be prompted. And actually we ask quite a lot of him, because we ask him to reorganize his entire knowledge base along a logic that's digestible for the people with whom he works. But what's really interesting is, once he did that, there was a universal lesson to be learned for him and the people in front of him. Because once you organize knowledge in a way the other people can actually digest, you realize what learning for adults very often is. It's change management. With adults, with any topic you touch on, it's very rare that you introduce the problem. You introduce a new solution or a new frame to the problem. If you talk about management, time management, you wouldn't expect yourself to introduce people to the fact that actually time is limited and there are a lot of things to do. Rather, what you suggest is a new solution or a different focus. So when you reorganize the knowledge, you suddenly find, okay, that's quite humbling, because the knowledge I put to people is a suggestion on what to do instead of what they do now. So you kind of work with their preconceptions they have. And at the same time, it's not just humbling, it's quite demanding, because you find yourself in the need to convince people to let go of their often valued preconceptions and give your knowledge a chance and a go in order to see that it's really better. That's something Bob got marvelously quick. The thing he really struggled with was the third thing I want to talk about, which is what creates, for experts it's so hard to see why people don't understand. So before we go there, let's make a mental step back and say, okay, whenever experts teach to someone else, we ask them to regress in their expertise, because otherwise we wouldn't understand them. The typical example is dancing class, where an expert dancer would break down what he does so marvelously well into steps we could understand, mimic, and would help us to build the same skill. Now, the thing is more complicated than that for most intellectual tasks. I would like to show you this by a bit of an awkward example. So imagine you don't like fireworks. Okay? So what you do on New Year's Eve is you go to bed. Because you don't like fireworks, what you do instead is you go up very early on the 1st of January in order to count how many birds come in your backyard. You do so every year, and I have for you here the results. So you count the birds on the 1st of January 2013, 14, 15. That's fairly straightforward. What you see on the right is exactly the same data, represented in a different way, which is each year gets its own diagram, and the number of birds you see is no longer given as an absolute, but in relative terms as a percentage. Okay, so what's really interesting is we could look at this from two angles. Let's look at this first from the angle of an expert who actually did this stuff. So if that's your data, and you look at this, you look through these graphs, and basically what you see is the same data set, only represented differently. And you would say, oh, cool, that's quite easy because it helps me to see what changed from one year to another. And that's actually quite convenient when I hang out with my mates who also don't like fireworks and also count birds in their backyard, because it allows them to compare better. For you as an expert, actually, that's only a matter of convenience. You could transform this easily mentally, and you could actually come up with dozens of more diagrams. Now, look at the same stuff from a learner perspective. What's the most obvious thing on this slide? Two sets of graphs. If you have no idea what this is about, you would probably ask, okay, or you would assume there are two sets of graphs. Hence, I would expect two distinct messages. So the point is, it makes a huge difference if you have created, if you express your expertise, or if you look at this from the outside. So that means for an expert which we're asked to teach, we basically ask them to take an unnatural perspective of their own expertise, which is quite a fundamental thing to ask them. If you run into this, what strategies do you have? Of course, as an expert, you can say, I want to show both graphs, and I explain why. It takes 5 minutes. The problem is you still impose complexity on the mind of the learners, and this comes at the price because at some point people shut off. So the real problem or the real challenge is, what is it you put in front of learners? So what we are asking of experts is to have the courage to decide of all the things they could say, what is it they should say, and what is it they do say. And when experts realize and accept this challenge, that's a very special moment because they now understand the special responsibility that comes with being a teacher. Thank you.